for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do.
A new twist this morning for the country's most famous political dynasty.
RFK Jr. plans
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went to the presidential race
October 9th in the state
that
it's time to heal a divided nation and return the power to the people.
Robert Kennedy Jr.
We are told today that our nation is hopelessly divided. But I found something different as I travel this country. I have witnessed an upwelling of optimism that I've never seen before. Something is stirring in us that says it doesn't have to be this way. And so I've come here today to declare our independence from the tyranny of corruption, which robs us of affordable lives, our belief in the future, and our respect for each other. But to do that, I must first declare my own independence. Independence from the Democratic Party and from all other political parties. I haven't made this decision lightly. It's very painful for me to let go of the party of my uncles, my father, my grandfather, and both of my great-grandfathers, but my sacrifice is nothing compared to the risk our founding fathers took when they signed the Declaration of Independence 247 years ago. They knew that if their revolution failed, every last one of them would be hanged. They chose to place everything on the line. When John Adams put his pen down after adding his signature to the Declaration, he turned to those present and he said to them, sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish. From this day on, I am with my country. I'm going to make that same pledge to you today so that I can stand before you, as every leader should stand before you, free of partisan allegiance, free from the backroom deals, a servant only to my conscience, to my Creator, and to you. Every president enters office promising to unite the nation and to work with people from the other party across the aisle. None of them ever does it. They can't. They're already chosen a side. Well, I'm not going to have that problem. I'm going to build coalitions from both sides of the aisle. And except for the small minority of public officials who are actually corrupt, I'm going to tell you this secret. They too want liberation from the system that has captured them. And isn't that ultimately what we all want? Liberation from a system that robs us of our wealth, our health, our hope, our patriotism, our ideals, our freedoms, and ultimately our sense of ourselves as a good and capable people. Is healing our divided nation possible? Let's go take back our country. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
I am a real American, fight for the rights of every man. I am a real American, fight for what's right, fight for your life.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the next president of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Thank you, Raleigh. I'm very, very happy to be here with you tonight. I want to thank all the volunteers who put this together and thank all of you for coming out here with this extraordinary crowd. We had open up a new section of this room to accommodate you all, so I'm very, very grateful. And I want to take note of a Gallup poll that came out today that showed that my favorability ratings are now more than 10 points ahead of President Biden and President Trump. And that's an encouraging sign. Of course, the recent polls by Quinnipiac, by the Harvard-Harris poll, by the Siena and New York Times poll, shows me winning among all Americans, beating both President Trump and President Biden, among Americans under 45 years old, and among independents, which are the two bellwether cohorts. So, and also that I'm now in a competition in the 6 battleground states. I'm at 24, which means theoretically, all you need theoretically is 34 to win if both other candidates were tied. It's winner take all, so I'm in 4.5. If I get 4.5 points from both of them, I would be in that position. So and I have 9 months ahead of me, more than 9 months to do that, so I'm very, very confident with this. Is the two presidents, former presidents that I'm running against are the most unpopular, both of them, candidates in American history, according to polling. And 61% of Americans say they do not want to make that choice, and we're going to offer them a choice other than forcing Americans to choose the lesser of two evils. We want to give them a campaign that inspires them, that gives them a hope for our country, that gives them a road back to unity, to feeling like we're all part of one nation, and that this time we really are all in it together, not like they told us during COVID, but for real. I want to talk a little bit about North Carolina. I was born in Virginia, and I grew up coming to North Carolina to visit Cape Hatteras, to camp at Cape Hatteras, to visit Asheville and the Blue Ridge. And then, when I became an environmental attorney, I ended up spending a lot of time in this state. I litigated a lot of cases in Wilmington. I started against the factory farming industry in this state and some of the other big polluters. I want to talk about, just do something unusual tonight and talk a little bit about that and my own kind of path in North Carolina. I started out going to work in 1984 for a group that was then called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. It later became Riverkeeper, and it was a blue-collar coalition of commercial and recreational fishermen who mobilized on the Hudson to reclaim the river from its polluters. We have on the Hudson River one of the oldest commercial fisheries in North America. It's 350 years old. Many of the people I represented for 40 years came from families that fished the river commercially since Dutch colonial times. It was a traditional gear fishery. They used the same fishing methods that were taught by the Algonquin Indians to the original Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam and then passed down through the generations. And one of the enclaves of that fishery was a little village called Crotonville, New York, 30 miles north of New York City on the east bank of the river. And Crotonville, the people who lived there were not your prototypical kind of affluent environmentalists. They were factory workers, carpenters, lathers, electricians. Half the people in Crotonville made their living either fishing or grabbing the river. These were people who had little expectation that they'd ever see Yosemite or Yellowstone or the national parks. They didn't have the resources to bring their families on those vacations. For them, the environment was their backyard. It was the bathing beaches, the swimming holes, the fishing holes of the Hudson. It was their livelihood. It was their property value. It was their recreation. And in 1964, Penn Central Railroad began vomiting oil from a 4.5-foot pipe in the Croton-Harmon rail yard, and the oil went up the river on the tides. It blackened the beaches. It made the shad taste of diesel, so they couldn't be sold at the Fulton Fish Market in New York City. And all the people in Crotonville came together in the only public building in the town, which was the American Legion Hall. This is a very patriotic community. Crotonville had one of the highest mortality rates during World War II of any community in our country. Almost all the original founders, board members, and officers of Riverkeeper were former Marines. They were combat veterans from World War II and Korea. And they came together in March of 1966 in this American Legion Hall. And these weren't radicals, they weren't militants. They were people whose patriotism was rooted in the bedrock of our country. But that night they started talking about violence because they saw something that they thought they owned, which was the abundance of these fisheries, the purity of the water, and it was being robbed from them by large corporate entities over whom they had no control. And they'd been to the government agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution, to the Corps of Engineers, the Conservation Department, the Coast Guard, and they were given the bum's rush. The Corps of Engineers colonel, after 12 separate visits by the head of this new organization, Richie Garrett, and another who was a former Marine, combat veteran from Korea, and another Marine called Art Glaucott, the Corps colonel, begging the Corps colonel to shut down the Penn Central Pipe. He finally told them in exasperation, these are important people. Speaking of the Penn Central Board of Directors, he said, we can't treat them that way. In other words, we can't force them to comply with the law. And they realized these agencies had been captured, that government was in cahoots with the polluters. And the only way that they were going to reclaim the river for themselves is if they confronted the polluters directly. And somebody suggested that they put a match to the oil slick coming out of the Penn Central Pipe and burn up the pipe. Somebody else said they should roll a mattress up and jam it up the pipe and flood the rail yard with its own waste. And somebody suggested that they float a raft of dynamite into the intake of the Indian Point power plant, which at that time was killing 1 million fish a day on its intake screens and taking food off their family tables. And then a guy stood up who was another Korean War vet, First Lieutenant Marine from Camp Lejeune, who was also the senior sports outdoor editor of Sports Illustrated. He was there for 65 years. And he had written an article about angling in the Hudson, but 2 years earlier, but in writing that article, he had discovered an ancient navigational statute called the 1888 Rivers and Harbors Act. And that statute said that it was illegal to pollute any waterway in the United States. You had to pay a big penalty if you got caught, but also there was a bounty provision. It said that anybody who turned in the polluter got to keep half the fine. And he had checked this out with the libel lawyers at Time Magazine, which owned Sports Illustrated, and they said it's still good law, but in 80 years it's never been enforced. That evening, he stood up in front of all these men and women who were talking about violence, and he said, we shouldn't be talking about breaking the law. We should be talking about enforcing it. And they resolved that evening they were going to start a new group called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, and later became Riverkeeper. They were going to go out and track down and prosecute every polluter on the Hudson. 18 months later, they shut down the Penn Central Pipe. They got to keep the first bounty in United States history under this statute, $2,000, which is a huge amount of money in Crotonville in 1968. There were 2 weeks of wild celebration in the town. And they used the money that was left over to go after Ciba Geigy, Tuck Tape, Standard Brand, American Cyanamid, the biggest corporations in America. In 1973, they collected $200,000 from Anaconda Wire and Cable for dumping toxics at Hastings, New York. They used that money to build a boat. They hired a full-time riverkeeper, a former commercial fisherman named John Cronin. He hired me using bounty money as the first attorney of the group, and we brought over 500 cases. I brought and forced polluters to spend about $5.5 billion remediating the Hudson. Hudson, when I was working on it, when I started working, was a national joke. It caught fire. It turned colors depending on what color they were painting the trucks at the GM plant in Tarrytown. It was dead water for 20-mile stretches north of New York City, south of Albany. Today, it's the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. It produces more pounds of fish per acre, more biomass per gallon than any other waterway in the Atlantic Ocean north of the equator. And as word got out about, I'm happy to answer questions later. When in 1986, as word of what we had done on the Hudson got out, we got a call from a guy from Wilmington, North Carolina. He was a former Marine, 26 years in the Marine Corps, a combat veteran from Vietnam named Rick Dove. And he had come, retired from the Marines, to start a fishing business on the Neuse River, and a commercial fishing and a restaurant, a seafood restaurant. And he then noticed that the fish, all the fish he was taking out of the Neuse, were covered with pustulating lesions. And he traced those lesions to a new disease called Pfiesteria biscuitia. And he traced that to an industry that nobody really knew about at that time because it was all hidden in rural areas, which was industrial hog farming. And there'd been a state senator here in West Virginia called Wendell Murphy, who had looked at what had happened to the chicken industry, where Frank Perdue, John Tyson, and Bo Pilgrim had devised a new way of raising chicken in cages in giant warehouses. And they had put out of business 1 million chicken farmers in our country, and they had made themselves billionaires. And Wendell Murphy said, I'm going to do the same thing with hogs. He went into business with Smithfield. They built a new slaughterhouse in this state. And he used his position in the Senate to pass 28 laws that made it almost impossible to sue somebody who calls himself a hog farm, even if it has nothing to do with the farming. And he left the Senate and he became close to a billionaire. And by raising hogs in factories, they dropped the price of pork from 60 cents a pound in about a 2-year period to 2 cents a pound. And it cost a farmer 32 cents a pound to raise that pig to kill weight. It put out of business, there were 28,000 hog farmers in this state, independent, and it put all of them out of business and left hog production in the hands of 2,000 industrial outfits, with all of them either owned or operated or with contracts with one company, Smithfield. And they dropped the price and they externalized all their costs. They took, a hog produces 10 times the fecal waste as a human being. So a hog farm with 100,000 hogs produces the same amount of waste as a city of 1 million people. And they made North Carolina the hog production capital of the world. And this business plan spread to every other state because they had to adopt it. And then Smithfield, which owned now 80% of the hog production in this state, 40% nationally, and was controlling our landscapes, sold itself to China. So now China has a colonial model in the rural parts of this state where it has these big lagoons that are poisoning the groundwater. And as president, I'm not going to hold the small farmer responsible because they couldn't help it. They were forced into this business model, but I'm going to hold Smithfield responsible and China. And one of the things that I learned from the fishermen, a number of things, was one that we own the waterways. The people, this Constitution of the state of North Carolina says the people of the state own the rivers of the state. They own the Roanoke, the Tar, the New, the Neuse, the Cape Fear, the French Broad. They're owned not by the government. They're not owned by D'Amour's company. They're not owned by Smithfield. They're owned by the people. Everybody has a right to use them. Nobody can use them in a way that will diminish or injure their use and enjoyment by others. And when somebody privatizes those resources, when, Smithfield owned all the fish in the Neuse River because we can't use them anymore because they were contaminated with Fisteria. They own the ground, D'Amour's owns the groundwater along the military reservations because they privatized it. They stole it from the public trust. And unfortunately, the government agencies that are supposed to prevent that and clean it up are captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. They become sock puppets for those industries. And I'm going to change that when I get to election. And we're told the big polluters and their indentured servants in the political process always tell us we have to choose between economic prosperity on the one hand and environmental protection on the other. And that is a false choice. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generation, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what the big polluters are urging us to do, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy. But our children are going to pay for our joyride, and they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they'll never be able to pay. Environmental injury is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the costs of our generation's prosperity onto the backs of our children. And one of the things that I've done over the past 40 years as an environmental advocate, and one of the lessons I'm trying to convey to the public during this campaign, is that investing in our environment does not diminish our nation's wealth. It's an investment in infrastructure, the same as investing in telecommunications or road construction. It's an investment we have to make if we're going to ensure the economic vitality of our generation and future generations. Nature is the infrastructure of our community. And if we want to meet our obligation as a generation, as a civilization, as a nation, which is to create communities for our children that provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, those assets, those resources that cannot be reduced to private property ownership, but by the nature are part of the commons, the commonwealth, the public trust assets. These are the resources, the landscapes, the waterways, the Neuse, the Cape Fear, all of these beautiful, pristine once pristine waterways in the French Broad, in North Carolina that enrich our lives. They connect us to our past, to our history. They provide context to our communities. They're the source, ultimately, of our values, our virtues, our characters of people, and they enrich us economically, yes, they enrich us culturally, they enrich us historically, but they also enrich us spiritually. God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great books of those religions, through wise people, through art and literature and music and poetry, but nowhere with the same texture and detail and grace and color and joy as through creation. And when we destroy these things, we diminish our capacity to sense the divine, to understand who God is and what our own potential is, therefore, as human beings. And when we do that, we impose a great cost on ourselves. We impose an even greater cost on our children, and it becomes a moral issue as well. And as your president, I'm going to talk about these things, and I'm going to make them part of the public conversation because you deserve a president who is thinking about these things and who understands them. And, you know, the privatization of the public trust and the shift, this systematic shift of wealth northward, upward, to this new oligarchy of super rich is now ingrained in our system. It is, you know, this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that happens at the agency level. The agencies become captured, whether it's the CIA, the Fed, NIH, CDC, EPA, FDA, FCC, all of them. Exactly, all of them. All of them are involved in strip mining the equity from the American middle class and shifting it northward. And they're getting away with it because they have a strategy. And that strategy is to keep us all at each other's throats, to keep us hating on each other, to pit Republicans against Democrats, to pit blacks against whites, to pit migrants, all of us fighting each other. And when the king and queen go out on the balustrades of their castle and they see all their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the banquet hall and they pop champagne corks because they know nobody's coming over the wall for them. And what I promised when I stood in front of all of you in Boston 8 months ago and announced this campaign, I promised that I wasn't going to participate in that vitriol and that hatred and the poison, the toxicity, the polarization. I said I'm going to focus on issues during this campaign, the values that hold Americans together, the common ground that we share, rather than targeting these little issues that keep us apart. And over the past 8 months, I feel like I've succeeded in doing that. If you ask people, we've polled our crowds time after time, and we find that they're Republicans, Democrats, independents, they're people of every political stripe. They're all tired of the hatred, the anger, the polarization, and the finger pointing. And so, I've searched for these issues, and I've avoided that kind of, I've avoided the temptation that the press is constantly trying to make you hate on me, hate on Trump, you hate on Biden, and I say I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to focus on these little issues that they want you to talk about, because those issues poison the debate. Instead, I've tried to identify the commonality that we have, and what I found is, at common ground, the common vision that's shared by almost all Americans is much, much larger landscape than the little issues that are orchestrated to keep us apart from each other. Everybody in this country wants to take care of our veterans. Everybody. They want it. Nobody likes the fact that the wives and children of veterans are eating in soup kitchens today, that veterans aren't getting proper health care, and that we're not taking care of them. We're not living up to our commitment to them for making the ultimate sacrifice that so many of them have made. Everybody wants us to have the best education system in the world again, and we can have that. Nobody wants the Mexican drug cartels running America's border policy. This is a nation of immigrants, and we welcome immigrants when they come in legally, but not illegally. Everybody wants to end the chronic disease epidemic that is debilitating our children. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. By 1986, it was 11.8, so it doubled in 26 years. By 2006, it was 54%. And we don't know what it is today. It's probably 6 of 10, so 60% of our kids are injured, badly injured, permanently. And NIH won't tell us what it is. They hide that data in this information chaos because they don't want us to make good, sound, informed decisions. And you know, we've seen neurological disorders explode in this country: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD. Autism has gone from 1 in 10,000 in my generation today to 1 in every 34 in my children's generation. What happened? Something happened. Everybody wants to, we have autoimmune disease that has exploded. We have allergic disease that exploded, and nobody's telling us where is it coming from. We know it's an environmental toxin. Genes don't cause epidemics. Every American wants to end the forever wars. And we have 800 bases abroad. Each one of them is picking a fight with somebody. The Russians have 2. The Chinese have 1.5. We have 800. And we spend more on our military than the next 10 nations combined. We need to protect our country. We need to safeguard it. We need to arm ourselves to the teeth at home. And we need to protect our sea lanes, including the Suez Canal, and we need to protect Antarctica and the neutral areas, and we need to have a strike capacity. We don't need to spend $1.3 trillion a year to do that. And everybody wants to unravel this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. We want the agencies to belong to us and not to the corporations they're supposed to regulate. And I feel like I'm in a better position than any president to do that, or any candidate. Because I've spent the last 40 years litigating against these agencies, and I've sued almost all of them. I've sued EPA probably more than any attorney in the country. I've sued FDA. I've sued CDC. I've sued NIH. I'm involved right now in litigation that involves DOT because I'm representing 1,000 families in East Palestine, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I just sued the FCC successfully in the Court of Appeals for lying to the public about cell phone radiation. And when you litigate against these agencies, you get a PhD in corporate capture. And I understand in many cases who the individuals in those agencies that need to be immediately moved. I understand the perverse incentives that put corporate capture on the steroids. And I understand how to change those rules, and in many cases without going to Congress, so I can do it by executive order and do it quickly. I'll say one other thing, that everybody in this country wants to protect all the amendments of our Constitution, and particularly the First Amendment guarantee of free speech. And as part of that campaign, I'm going to give a civics lesson to the American public by pardoning Julian Assange and Edward Snowden my first day in office. And the same day, I'm going to sign an executive order ordering all federal employees, including the FBI and the CIA, to refrain from colluding or communicating with media or social media companies to censor American political speech. Oh, I know that I can do it. You give me a sword and some ground to stand on, and I'm going to take your country back for you. But I can't do it alone. I need a big army of people, and this is an army that I'm looking at in front of me today. President Biden and President Trump can get on the ballot for free. And I need to spend about $15 million to do it. And that's, in the long run, it's going to help me because we already have 50,000 volunteers in the field. We're building out a ground game, a ground army in every state, and in many cases in every county. That is going to be, that's forcing us to do that, to get on the ballot. But what that means, and when the general election comes, I'm going to have a better army on the street, in the neighborhoods, than any other candidate. There's people at the back of the room. We need to sign up several tens of thousands of people here in North Carolina to get me on the ballot. Tonight is the beginning of that effort. There's people at the back of the room. Please stop before you leave. Sign the ballot support. And the other things I need you to do, go to our website, pay something. We need money, but I don't need all your money. Send $5 if you can. We want 100% participation to show the FCC. The FEC and the American public that we have broad support from much larger. Last Q3, we outraised President Trump and President Biden from small contributions. And that's one of the metrics that the press uses and the public uses to assess the success and the possibilities for our campaign. So please do that. The other thing that I would ask you to do, we're winning in all of the cohorts at Watch podcasts or long form interviews. So we're killing it with young people, killing it with independents. The place where I'm weak is with baby boomers. Now, the baby boomers, and I know there's a lot of you out here, so God bless you. But you know, I should be doing best with baby boomers because they remember Camelot and the Kennedy administration. The problem is they get their news from CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times. We need to, if that's the only, if I was living in that information bubble, I would have a very low opinion of myself. What we need to do is to open their eyes by showing them that there are alternatives and get them to look at at Aubrey Marcus or Joe Rogan podcasts or Lex Friedman. And so it's really important to me, if you want to help this campaign, wear a hat, wear a button, wear some merch, because every couple days somebody's going to come and say to you, why are you voting for that guy? I thought he was a conspiracy theorist, quack, anti-science. And you can say to them, will you look at this podcast for 10 minutes? And when we get people to do that, we have a huge conversion rate. So, there's a lot of other things that are going to happen. I'm going to be on a debate stage, hopefully, with President Biden and President Trump. And the mainstream media, for the first time, I've got an interview this week with CNN, and that is going to be live. It's the first time that they've done that. Oh, I'm hoping more and more that breaks, but until then, I rely on you, my army. I'm so grateful, number one, for your prayers, which are invaluable. Our team feels that all the time. And the power of that, but also your support, your commitment coming out here tonight is, it's so moving to me and to all of us that so many of you came out. I'm grateful to you, and we're going to end this vigil, and then we're all going to go over the wall, and we're going to take our country back. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm going to do selfies with anybody who wants to right now, beginning at 5 minutes. And this looks like a huge crowd, so you might think that's insurmountable. But we did in Charleston, we did 600 people in 23 minutes. So we have a system. If everybody walks fast, we'll get it done quickly. I look forward to seeing you and shaking your hands of each one of you. Thank you all very much.
Let's hear it one more time for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.